Welcome into episode 224. Be sure you're following us on Twitter at Bailey J. Adams22, at by CA Simmons, at Night Sports Now, and at Pegasus Podcast. You can also email us at Pegasus Podcast by KSN at gmail.com. We're back for another postgame podcast. UCF took care of business against Sam Houston, 45-14. Christian was at the game. I'm full work from home mode right now because I'm wearing basketball shorts and my Night Sports Now polo. Watched the game from home, which was nice. And Christian, how were things at the bounce house?
Things at the bounce house were pretty good. I'm going to stop doing the thing where UCF plays a G5 team and I say, guys, this isn't an FCS team. Be more worried than you are about the score. Which I want to be clear. If you listen to our previous podcast, I never said be worried about the game. I was just like, oh, it could be like 38-13 or something. Nah, UCF pretty much just crushed them from start to finish.
Yeah.
So right before the game started, Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. And I realized two things in that moment. The first was that because I was in the press box for that, we're waiting for the rain delay to stop. And I was just like, oh, well, now I am worried about this game. Like something about watching that happen. I just suddenly was like, oh, they totally could lose. And then my second thought, right when the offense took the field, and I really actually don't like the UCF when they win the coin toss. Sometimes they like to receive even against a team like this, but they did. And KJ trots out there. And I realized in my head, in that moment, I was like, oh, I don't expect him to be any better. Like there was this moment of clarity where he goes out and I'm like, I'm expecting nothing different from last week. But, I guess that's a pleasant surprise. It was very different from last week. He looked exactly like the quarterback we thought he was going to be all offseason to this game. It was a pretty shocking turn of events.
You want to know my dumb realization of like, oh yeah, like this you just saw Northern Illinois beat Notre Dame. Like that makes sense. Yeah, okay. And another team overlooked, whatever. I was this morning seeing like Sam Houston on Twitter, they're like game day posts, and I was like, oh, like this seems like a really like well-run program just from based on nothing. And I was like, maybe like, I was like, they seem pretty hyped up for this. And I don't know, maybe every team is like that when they come to the bounce house. But yeah, so that happened, but it really wasn't much of a game.
No, it wasn't. This again is one of those games where if you're not freaks like us, I assume that just wasn't interesting because it was just sort of UCF in a very uncompetitive game running all over them. Yeah, I don't know. I do know. I'm trying to sort right before we got on. I told Bailey, I've just got home. The presser and then traffic. It's been a whole thing. There were like two, I hope everyone's okay. There were like two bad crashes on my way between UCF's campus and here, and there were ambulances and stuff. So it just took me a while to get back here. But now that I'm quickly trying to organize my thoughts. But yeah, I'm trying to balance because we've talked about a billion times that you're not supposed to take too much away from games like this because you just never know. And also college football is a week-to-week thing. And I think it would be stupid to swing from, wow, KJ sucked last week to, wow, now he's amazing. But I do think that the argument that he maybe just didn't take the last game super seriously is gaining some traction after Gus said earlier this week at the Mellow Mushroom thing that or whatever that's called, Night Talk, is that what that's called?
I think so.
Okay. He said at that thing that KJ had his best week of practice ever. And then KJ came out there and looked really good, threw really good passes. And one thing that really impressed me, and we talked about his mobility a little bit after New Hampshire, but there were multiple plays tonight where, okay, the initial play isn't there or the O-line breaks down a bit. And he's just like, okay, I'm just going to like truck six guys and get a first down. And that showing up, the much more improved decision-making, the crisp passing. I mean, he threw a beautiful downfield ball to Kobe. He threw this dart to Kobe on a 3rd and 1. He was just consistently getting the ball out. It looked night and day. It absolutely looked night and day against a better team than they played last week.
Yeah, and again, like we talked all last like post-game podcast about, he doesn't have to be a star. And tonight he wasn't a star. He didn't have to be. He went 12 of 15, 169 yards, didn't score a touchdown, but didn't need to. They ran the ball for 384 yards again. Again, we'll get on to the run game in a bit, but for me, it was the first drive, which was sloppier because of the penalties, but he looked better. Yeah. There was one play on the first drive where I think it was it was one of the he converted the first 3rd down by just running over people.
Yep.
And then there was another 3rd down where he avoids a sack, steps through and steps up into the pocket and finds Randy Pittman down the field. And it was that kind of play where I was like, all right, he extended the play. And then he found Randy Pittman on a good throw to convert it again. I was like, all right, I'm already starting to feel a little bit better about what we're seeing. And it ended up being a crisp game other than I guess it was a sack fumble that he kind of just got hit on. And that was maybe not a great moment, but it was at that point, it was out of the game was out of reach anyway. So
that was his one bad moment of the night was he tried a pump fake. And then in the process of the pump fake, Sam Houston defender got to him and he let the ball go. And I think the ball was it. So this bothered me. Now that is on KJ because he ended up throwing the pass backwards basically, which obviously is a lateral and a fumble. And what bothered me was it got in range where I think it was Javarius Johnson could have just caught the ball. And for
Oh,
some reason he just kind of stared at it like he thought it was an incompletion that wasn't worth trying to grab, and it lands on the ground and the Sam Houston player jumps on it. And I'm just kind of like, did Javarius Johnson understand if that was a turn? Like I don't think the receiver
I don't
understood that he needed to jump
know.
on that. But that
I
was
don't
one
think
bad
he
moment, yeah.
I don't think he realized it was a backward pass. I think he just thought it was and he even
Yeah.
saw him kind of hesitate because like he almost jumped on it and he was like, oh no, like it
Yeah, he like
wasn't.
very
And
easily could have
then
secured it.
yeah. But
That
yeah,
doesn't
for
bother me.
KJ, yeah, for KJ, like yeah, you got to feel that pressure because like he just did not feel it at all. But
Right.
out of the whole game, I'm not really going to fault him for that.
After the way that last week went, we're coming back and we have one play of KJ's that we have issue with. I would not have guessed that going into this game. So,
Yeah,
and yeah, like I said, I'm trying to balance. We're not going in now on wow, KJ's amazing. This is great, but it's what you said. It's what we've been saying is that he just needs to manage the game. The running backs are nuts. We saw that again tonight. It's really actually unfair to the rest of college football that UCF has this running back room. And as long as KJ is just doing enough through the air, because I think it's clear, and I don't know, because these are obviously we're not seeing UCF's offense in full force against these teams. We're going to learn a lot more about against TCU, but as we expected all offseason, it seems pretty clear that the heart of this UCF offense is going to be running the damn ball. And as long as KJ can just keep that open by doing enough through the air that teams have to account for his skill set too, then UCF can be really freaking good on offense this year. And I'm talking really
yeah,
good on offense.
yeah, and because of that, I mean, a little bit more in the passing game. Just as we kind of look at this as offense performance as a whole, it's a hilarious like stat sheet. Like it's really funny when you look at like Kobe Hudson had 104 yards receiving on 5 catches. The next highest receiving yards was Randy Pittman, 32 yards on two catches, and they didn't really need anything more than that. I know Xavier Townsend got a little more involved in the run game than he had, but yeah, if the receiving core we've all offseason we did talk about like who's going to be wide receiver three, and then we both were kind of just like they might really not really need like wide receiver three to be that good because they're just going to run the ball. They ran the ball 57 times tonight, and they just need to keep doing that because it's working. So
As
yeah,
I know that these are two lesser opponents, and we'll see against TCU, but it seems like a winning strategy. And this was again the thing tonight where there were a couple because it's like I want to be clear that when you talk about why UCF's running the ball well against in the two fake games that were finally passed, it's yeah you can just say oh the O line's dominant like they don't have the athletes whatever. There were multiple plays tonight that like should have gone for no yards that RJ was just like well let me be RJ and just turn this into something, and that we know that he does that against better teams as well. So is there anything else on KJ? I feel weird to already be moving on from KJ, but I feel like that's just it. He looked a lot better. I'm not nearly as freaked out about him as I
yeah,
was before.
yeah. I think we talked about him for like 20 minutes last week on the podcast on the post game, and now I'm just kind of like yeah, looked good, looked better,
Yeah.
and
We'll learn a
again
lot
we'll
more next
see
week,
like
but
TCU, I'm starting to already get stressed just because it's actually like going to be a test and they're going to be on the road and we'll see. But yeah, I mean, having this run game definitely helps,
let me say
to
really
put it
quickly,
lightly.
as stressed
Yeah.
as you feel now, think of how much worse it would be if KJ came out and looked like how he did against New Hampshire. This would have been
Oh,
an
absolutely.
apocalyptic podcast if that had happened. And I think that it's just so valuable that now, like I'm in the opinion now that the New Hampshire game will look more like a fluke as time goes on. I'm not expecting him to be awesome, but I just think that we've clarified at least that okay, it's not like he just can't play suddenly after performing so well in the SEC.
Yeah, and I said it like 5 times last podcast, and I think the post game podcast too is just like he had never looked as bad as he did against New Hampshire. So it was
No,
like it was concerning, but now yeah, he came out and did what he needed to do in this game, and I do feel better going forward. And we will see. We'll see how they respond as a whole team, not just KJ, but we'll see how the offense fares against a stiffer test in TCU on the road, all of that, next week. But having this run game, like looking at it, RJ Harvey, 126 yards and 4 touchdowns. I think all 4 touchdowns were in the first half, weren't they? Maybe
I
three of
think
them
that's
were. I
right.
know
Yeah.
that. Penny Boone again didn't see much of the first half. Or I don't think he saw a carry at all in the first half.
No,
He got
he
one in
never
the
got it in
third
the first
quarter.
half.
Came in and he had 10 carries for 54 yards, hit a touchdown, a good 5.4 yards per carry. Xavier Townsend, 51 yards on 4 carries. Miles Montgomery, 51 yards on 9 carries. KJ had 64 yards on 9 carries. Then later on in the game, Ja'Curry Brown, 2 carries, 32 yards. Johnny Richardson only had, it surprised me that he only had 2 carries. He had 2 carries for 19 yards. That surprised me because I feel like I saw him in there more. But
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. That feels weird to me. I feel like he was out there more than twice, but
why I said earlier, like the wide receiver part of the stat sheet's funny. When you look at the running game, everyone averaged everyone averaged an insane yards per carry except for Dylan Risk, who ran one time for 3 yards, and then Cam Ingram, who ran one time for -2 yards. Like
yeah.
the average yards per carry goes 6.6 for RJ, 5.4 for Penny, 12.8 for Xavier Townsend, 5.7 for Montgomery, 5.6 for KJ, 16 for Ja'Curry Brown, and 9.5 for Johnny. Like that, it's unfair, really. Like the fact that they've been able to put together this kind of running back room and just overall rushing attack. Like again, yeah, we're 2 games in and it's New Hampshire, it's Sam Houston, but this is the kind of stuff that I feel like can translate. Maybe not, they're not going to run for 380 yards every game, but if they fall off a little bit and they run for 220, 240, like that's going to be pretty solid.
So that's exactly what I was going to say was we don't need them to do this. Like, yes, they're playing worse competition, but if they're rushing for almost 400 yards against worse competition, that will translate. And one of the things I felt like we learned about the running backs tonight is Miles Montgomery seems pretty firmly RB2. And it seems like we're not going to really know until they're playing some P4 teams, but we're learning a little more about the running back strategy. And I'm realizing what makes Miles so valuable. And once again, an amazing player that we decided to just not talk about for most of this offseason once they got Penny is that he is so similar to RJ just as his physical abilities, how he plays, his style, that they're doing this thing and it's going to just pay off so much as the season goes along where Harvey goes out there and gets a few carries, looks really good as usual. Then he comes off and gets a rest and they put out this other running back where there's very little drop off. Miles Montgomery is very freaking good and can just sort of fill that role. And Penny, we didn't see till the second half. I'm kind of curious how they're going to use him because we've talked about the offseason. He's a different kind of running back. He's a bigger, more bruising type of running back. And I don't know. I kind of like the idea of, we'll see if it pans out, but I kind of like the idea of you get into the second half and you've got this tired defense. Now you just throw at them a completely different running back who is completely fresh and really physical. And and then there's Johnny, who's just the speedy guy who's always in there making big plays as well. Miles is definitely a surprise. He's a lot better than I was anticipating, but the way they were using him tonight was just so fun to me. Just RJ does cool stuff. He gets a break. Miles does the exact same stuff. It sucks for opposing defenses. It's going to be tough for them all year.
Yeah, and that feels perfect. Like the way they use him tonight, and like Johnny is going to be in there for a certain number of plays. He can do stuff on the ground. He can do stuff in the passing game too. Like he's versatile enough to where they can use him in multiple ways. But yeah, you might give RJ and Miles. I'm curious how they kind of split that going forward, because I wonder if almost like what would it look like if they have maybe Penny in that role that Miles Montgomery played tonight. He comes in and rotates with RJ early. And then you have a fresh Miles Montgomery coming in the second half. Like the fact that they have this many options, and I don't know if they'll really like put them into these defined roles, but they have so many options with these running backs. Yeah. And I'm really curious about how it's going to play out against, Big 12 opponents. And then obviously the Florida game.
The thing that I worry about with Penny though, is it's just Miles is making it hard to justify using him because Miles is really good.
Yeah.
And we have to wait until we see against the big boys. We know that, but man, he's really, really talented. And it's just so funny how they have this amazing running back in RJ, and they can just throw Miles Montgomery in there, and it feels like they've got the same running back out there. So, and before we get away from running backs, because we're talking about how awesome they all are, I really feel the need to directly call out RJ Harvey, who once again just had a stupid stat line tonight, like you talked about. I just hit first 4 touchdown game for a running back, which I think it ties the all-time UCF running back record with Isaiah Bowser against Bethune-Cookman in 2021. So I just love that we are 2 games into the season. He's well over 200 yards and has 6 rushing touchdowns and is averaging I think it's 7.5 or 8 yards a carry on the season.
Yeah.
Stupid stats. Just crazy.
He's unreal. I feel blessed and lucky to be able to watch him play football for UCF, because it has been a special, 2.5 years, I guess. Cause if you take maybe half the 22 season, I don't know, whatever. It's been a lot of fun to watch, and I think he's going to do even more down the rest of the season. We're getting into the conference schedule and all that, and just to have a guy like that who is your go-to guy, your bell cow running back for your offense, it's a good spot to be in. I mean, he's unreal.
Yeah, I'm holding on to some takes about Ollie Gordon. We gotta get through the TCU game and make sure RJ Harvey does what he's supposed to do in that game because I really can't be the guy who brags about my team's running back after they played 2 bad teams so we're gonna wait one more game, but you can't tell me with a straight face. I just Ollie Gordon is if you don't know who we're talking about, Ollie Gordon is Oklahoma State's running back, who's largely considered the best in the country, and he is. He's very good, but I was just very frustrated how it feels like RJ Harvey just doesn't get the same level of credit as he does. Is there anything you've seen from these first two games for either team where I'm like, yeah, I'd want Ollie Gordon over RJ Harvey right now?
No.
No.
But
No.
again, I mean, there's time, but no.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I'm holding the take.
Yeah.
We're not putting that on Twitter yet, but if RJ Harvey's really good against TCU, that take is going to see the light of day in dramatic fashion. So hold on to that one. But
yeah. Anything else on the offense?
the penalties were
O-line?
crazy, man. The first,
yeah,
there was, so the whole thing we talked about last week of how great is they're done with penalties, that went away quick. It was on the game, they had 6 penalties for 45 yards. All but one of those were on the offense. Also, almost all of them came on like the first 2 drives. I don't know what was going on. And that's why I'm almost slightly less worried about it, because that first drive was crazy. It was false starts, holding, and it was a little scary, but then they just settled down. So I don't really totally know what that was about, to be honest. I don't know. Are you worried? I'm not particularly concerned about that, but
no, I was early on, but then for them to only end up with 6 for 45, like most games I'll take that. Like that's not terrible. Like I did just get done watching USF and Alabama, where both teams had like 90 something yards and penalties. I think it was like flags every other play. So and what we're used to with UCF is stuff like that. So yeah, I mean 5 for whatever it was, 6 for 45, 5 for 45, whatever it was, I can stomach that.
Yeah. The only other, I mean, I agree. Like I said, I would have been more worried if it went on past the first drive, but what can you do? The only other thing I wanted to bring up for the offense was that when KJ Jefferson was asked about what was different for him this week from last week, he had pretty vanilla answers. There wasn't anything super insightful there, but one thing he kind of jokingly talked about, because he was asked about the helmet comms, which we talked a lot about last week and how that's going, and he said that one thing they've worked on is Gus keeping the mic farther from his mouth, because he says that Gus will get very excited when calling certain plays and is just sort of screaming into the mic, and KJ isn't sure what's happening. So like I said, KJ sort of said that in jest, but I thought that was funny and worth mentioning, that because I can just sort of see that Gus realizing a play is going to work and just being like, oh, and KJ being like, what the hell? So I'm glad they are working on that.
I wouldn't enjoy having someone yelling in my ear. So yeah, that's good that seemed.
I don't know if we're the right podcast to cast judgment on people hearing yelling in their ears, to be totally honest, but what can you do?
I've never yelled on this podcast.
Me neither.
Yeah, right. All right, let's talk UCF's defense. They gave up 14 points.
Devastating.
The first 7 came on a wide receiver pass. 64 yards.
Can I stop you right there? Can I stop you right there?
Yeah.
Okay. Sam Houston's coach in his press conference this week said that Gus Malzahn likes gimmicks, and they have to be ready for the gimmicks. And then the only impressive play that Sam Houston had in a full football game was a gimmick. Had to shout that out for a second, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was actually I was going to get there in that statement. Because it was funny. But yeah, they had the wide receiver pass, and then they scored, pretty late. It was really honestly a good throw and catch to score their second touchdown. But I was pleased with the defense again. Man, for most of the night, they were not able to do anything. I mean, X3 Alexander ended up being one of the leading tacklers, so we saw more of him in this game. He had a tackle for loss. Nigel Kelly was really, really good. He had a sack, forced a fumble that Sam Houston recovered. He also broke up a pass in the backfield. The secondary looked good again. It was Sheldon Arnold and Mac McWilliams coming up with interceptions this time. And again, I feel good. I'm excited about what we've seen so far, and I'm eager to see what this defense looks like against TCU, because TCU's got a much better offense than these two teams we've seen. And just in general, they're from what I've seen, I know that I didn't watch any of them tonight, and I know they played I forget, it was like a Long Island or something like that.
They won 45-0. Yep.
Yeah, but again, we saw them a little bit last week in Stanford, and I think they've got a solid offense, really good quarterback. So it's going to be a test all around for UCF, but especially kind of eager to see what this defense can do against that group.
Yeah, like you said, it's tough, and I really don't want this to be the thing where we're looking back on these podcasts in a few months and we're like, wow, we talked so much about this defense and it wasn't that good, but I just don't really see that happening. I know they played 2 bad teams, and I know that the defense is just always going to look good doing that. The defense looked good against Kent State last year, and it looked good against Villanova. The reason I have more hope, and I'm still don't think this is like an elite defense. We haven't, there's nothing they could have shown in these 2 games where we could have come to that conclusion, but I think part of the difference is just it just feels like they have playmakers everywhere now, and that's what they were sort of
Mhm.
missing last year. Like Nigel Lee Kelly doing crazy things. Ethan Barr was like having some hits tonight, and Deshaun Pace obviously doing what he does. And then the backfield, we've now run out to what 4 guys with interceptions in the backfield this year.
Yeah.
All transfers, which is kind of funny. It just feels like there are so many guys who can just make plays everywhere that it's hard to not be optimistic about what that group's going to be. The only like housekeeping thing was Deshaun Pace just didn't start the game for some reason. It was X-Ray Alexander on the first drive. Deshaun Pace was just standing on the sideline waiting to go in during that, and then Gus was asked about in post game and asked if he could share why that was, and he just kind of paused and was like, "No." So I don't think there was anything to that, but just a random housekeeping note, but. Yeah, it's pretty cool
Yeah.
that we're through both fake games and there's still like I don't know what I would say I'm concerned about. Like what would you say your number one concern is with the defense right now? I'd kind of have a hard time nailing something down.
Yeah, I'm not really sure.
Seems like a good sign,
I
right?
Yeah, like I think it's something I talked about last week and then corrected on the podcast this week. It was like, yeah, they don't have a lot of sacks, but they have one over 2 games. But again, it was one of those things. We saw a little bit more pass rush tonight because it wasn't Sam Houston wasn't getting the ball out as quick as New Hampshire was. They had a little
Right.
bit more to it, and they've got a mobile quarterback, and I think that's kind of why they let him drop back and sit in the pocket a little bit more. But I'm not really concerned about it. And Nigel Kelly looked good. We're going to see more, I think, as time goes on. Kind of like what you said. For me, my confidence in this defense and what we've seen so far comes a lot from. It seems like they hit on a lot of these transfers. Like Deshaun Pace has looked good. X-Ray Alexander looked pretty good tonight. Nigel Kelly, like I said, Deshaun Pace. The secondary guy, Sheldon Arnold, Mac McWilliams, Ethan Barr at linebacker. Like they're looking like UCF got hits on these guys. Maybe they're
Yeah.
not all superstars and they're not all as great as they've looked the first 2 weeks, but they all seem to be solid players who UCF can count on going forward. And you add that to already having Lee Hunter, Ricky Barber. Hopefully you get John Walker back soon, like whatever, and Malachi Lawrence. Like having all of that, you kind of have more of a full defense now, it seems like.
There's a chance I deeply regret saying this. But
Oh,
part of
good.
the reason that I am extra excited for the TCU game now and feel like there is perhaps extra importance on this game is that they have Colorado next, which is looking more and more like a layup by the week. Colorado did not have a good night. And I know we talked
Nope.
about it a little bit on our last pod, but Colorado is also bad at all of the things that UCF is good at, which is encouraging. So suddenly you're in this position where everything looks good. The one major concern from game one to game two, we saw big improvement. We know it's two bad opponents, but it's better than seeing red flags at this point. And now suddenly it feels like they're almost a road win at TCU away from probably being undefeated heading into the Florida game. Like that's kind of where we are right now.
I hate that you just said that because
It
now that's all I'm be thinking
it's
about.
kind of where we are, man. It sort of feels like that TCU game's the last
Yeah.
obstacle.
Yeah, and I don't want to look at it like that because Colorado does have a lot of talent,
They
but
have
it
three
does
good
feel
players.
likely. Like that's
No, they have
they
three good.
do.
I'm dropping that take. They have Shador Sanders, they have Travis Hunter, they have Jimmy Ford, and then they have a subpar team. That is Colorado, and I don't know. I again, I'm going to say this, and it's going to age horrifically when UCF somehow loses that game, and because of it. But if they lose that game, it will absolutely be because of those three players and no one else. It'll be Shador Sanders dancing around and finding Hunter for ridiculous catches. Their O line is not good. UCF's
No, it's
defensive
not.
line appears to be pretty solid based on what we know. And they also can't stop the run. So that seems like a winning formula for your UCF going up against Colorado. So adds a little bit of extra pressure to the TCU game because that is still just such a wild card. If I really have no idea what TCU is.
Yeah, I don't know, but I don't. Anything else on the defense before we talk a little special teams?
Yeah, I don't think so. They look good. I'm really
Yeah,
happy that we're through 2 games and still don't really have anything to talk about on the defense. That's very encouraging. I'm sure we
yeah,
will after TCU. Like something will. They're not pitching a
absolutely.
shutout. Something's gonna happen against TCU that we'll have to talk about. But as of now, I'm feeling good.
Yeah, me too. And then special teams, we talked a little bit. We've gone through a little bit of a roller coaster over the last week or so, where on the post game podcast after New Hampshire, we were like, Colton Boomer's back, looked great. We then say things we missed. His 2 field goals maybe didn't, weren't the cleanest field goals. We said that on Monday's podcast, and then he comes out tonight and he nails a 50-yarder. And
Yeah.
I was like, all right, I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good
Welcome back,
again.
Colton Boomer.
Um,
You tell me,
yeah,
because again, same issue. I'm in the stands. Did he make that with ease? I don't know.
somewhere in between. Like it didn't just sneak in. It wasn't right down the middle, but it was like it
Okay.
was pretty comfortable. Like there wasn't a moment where I was kind of like, oh, I'm not sure.
All I had to base it
Um,
off of was the student section started cheering very early into the kick, which made me feel like it
okay.
was on the mark.
Yeah. That might have just been because they could tell that it had the distance and just were waiting
Yeah.
on that. But it was no, it was good and good to see that. The other special teams thing was tight end Evan Morris, a transfer tight
Oh
end.
my God. Yeah.
He came in for a kickoff sometime in the second half and hit it for a touchback. It was like a deep touchback
Yeah.
too.
It was better
And I
than
guess
Boomers. It was better than Boomers kickoffs.
yeah, I want to shout out. I think it was Sidelines UCF. I think had put like on. They would do like the countdown for players throughout the summer. On his, it's like he was a former preferred walk-on kicker, I guess. So he's done this before, and it looked good. I know we talked last week about them trying to maybe take some stress off of Boomer's leg and have, why am I drawing a blank on his
Grant
name?
Reddick.
Grant Reddick. Yeah,
We've
Grant
already
Reddick.
forgotten him. We saw one touchback from Evan Morris,
From
and we were
Evan
like, "Bye,
Morris.
Grant Reddick."
I'm all in on seeing big tight end Evan Morris doing kickoffs for the rest of the year.
So is Gus. Gus said in postgame, "We're excited to have the biggest kicker in the country." Like Gus was not hiding that. Like big news, he's good and we'll be using
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So that was cool. That was
That was
interesting.
unexpected. I can't like obviously like I don't know. You tell me. Like I always, God, I'm so removed now from when I used to go to games as a fan more. Like I'm like I don't know how close attention just paying to like random players. But obviously in the press box, I'm like since I have to do a podcast after, I'm like trying very hard to keep track of everything. And I just had like the brain fart moment where he comes out and I'm like Evan Morris. I'm like Evan Morris. Like I just didn't like compute why he was out there. I was so confused. It was
Yeah.
a good kick, and Gus said in postgame that they tried that out this week, and that he said in practice he hit a touchback, and they were like, "Okay, big news, you're gonna kick in Sam Houston." So yeah, I mean, Gus is adamant that this is big for Boomer and just his health if they can take that off of him, and obviously, like a lot of teams do that. So if they can make that work, awesome. Probably gonna help the season a lot. Also really quickly, Morris also was just good as a tight end tonight too. He was playing a lot. He's just a really good blocking tight end.
Mhm.
They had a lot of sets that were both Randy Pittman and Evan Morris out there at the same time. That was interesting. I mean, we talked so much about Randy this offseason. We really just ignored Evan Morris, and I in my head was like, we'll never see him, and he's actually filling that blocking tight end role very well. So shout out to Evan Morris, dual threat player.
Yeah. I was taken aback by that, but I liked it. Good to see. Then the other thing, the special teams, Xavier Townsend looked good again, on returns. He had a couple. I think he almost broke one. He's going to break one this year at some point. I don't know
I'm
who it'll
willing
be
to bet
against, but
my life on him returning a punt or kick for a touchdown this year. It is going to happen. My life on
will
the
it
line. It will happen.
will it be called back?
Probably, but it will happen. That's what's important. Is
Yeah.
it will be wiped off the board by I don't know, some random player deciding to deck a defender nowhere
40
near the
yards down the field.
literally nowhere near it.
Yeah.
But he's so honestly, what I love is this is such a stupid take in some ways, but I like the punt returns and the punt returns I was happiest with tonight were the couple where it was kind of an awkward bounce and he just let it go or just had a basic fair catch because that's the part that it's so hard for players like that to marry is the players who are truly dynamic and can make some good returns want to do it on every single return. And that's where bad things happen. And him marrying being so good at the returns and so dynamic and also being perfectly willing to just let one go if he doesn't see a play there that's what makes me excited for it. Just stress free.
Yeah. I mean, all around, like I watched that game very stress free in general. Just like,
Yeah.
yeah, nice to get it out of the way. Nice to see KJ look better. Nice to see the run game still. I didn't have any questions. Like I didn't think they would be like, can they run on Sam Houston? It was a stress free game that I enjoyed. And now we're going to get into a very stressful game next week at TCU.
The one thing I was a little stressed is a strong word. I don't know. I was, as the game was going on, I just kept sort of thinking, I would have really loved if we had just seen KJ like uncork one pass downfield just to like show that's an option. And then he did that. And it
Yeah.
was an incredible throw and an incredible catch. And that got me. And so I came out pretty stress free on that too. So I'm in a good mood. I'm in a better mood than I think really at any point through this offseason I would have anticipated being through these two games, which means UCF is going to lose to TCU on the road next week, which is going to suck. But what can you do?
If that happens, I'm just going to blame it on the idea of if they win, they'll be four. They could beat Colorado before no going into Florida. Like thinking about that Now they're going to lose to TCU because we have that picture in our head.
Yeah, we're not going to do the TCU preview before we do the TCU preview, but I think what sucks about that game is I just have no idea what that team is. Like they've played, and I guess we don't really necessarily know what UCF is either, so because of the opponents they've played, but
yeah,
like that TCU Stanford game was just baffling to me. At no point during that game was I like, yeah, I get what's happening here. It's just they did some really good things and some really awful things. So
yep.
I don't know. I really want to give the nod to UCF just because I think UCF has more talent, but I just don't know. And it's on the road, which also sucks.
Yeah, that's the thing is the road thing is what's tripping me up. Like I'm kind of just like, oh, what's this gonna look like?
I guess
And we'll
that
be
is
there
if
to
this
see
were
it.
a home game, I wouldn't be that worried. And part of that is can I get a little philosophical for a minute? We can end the pod after that, I
Sure.
guess.
Yeah.
This was a game tonight where we had a rain delay. There was lightning in the area. I don't know why we call it a rain delay. It's really not the rain why it's delayed. Maybe I just call it that. Maybe it is lightning delayed.
Weather
I don't know
delay?
what's happening. Guys, it's midnight. I don't know what's going
Lightning
on
delay?
anymore. Um, Either way, we had the delay. It was pouring leading up to the game. And this is not an important game by any way, shape, or form. It's the second straight week against a team that doesn't matter. Some of the more casual fans like Bailey here didn't even want to go to it. And the crowd was, I'm sorry, that was really mean. I
You're
just
a
wanted to
bad
see if I
guy.
could.
You're
I
a
thought you were
bad
going to say
guy.
it made it so much worse because I thought I'd say it and you'd react and you just didn't react in any way. And I'm like, no, I didn't mean that. I was just trying to be mean. Um, the crowd was awesome, man. First off, they listened to the whiteout. It was a full on one of the better whiteouts they've done in recent years. The place was packed. It was rowdy. And I just kind of had this moment because I was thinking more about when we were looking at when you were here over the weekend, that picture of the 2016 Tulsa game, which was just like this game with no one at it and how that was just the standard. And I just sort of had this moment where I'm sitting there in the press box, just kind of smiling to myself, where I'm like, this is the fan base now. It's this program where it's this fun environment that people love going to. Students and alumni together pack the stadium for every game, literally rain or shine, and have an awesome time. And that's just the standard now. And
Yeah.
that continued through last season, even through the losing streak. It's continued in this year when there was no reason to have any interest in this game tonight. And they still are out there in the rain. And I love that UCF's that fan base. And I hope that we don't ever take that for granted because UCF has not always been like this. And frankly, there aren't a lot of teams that can not only have good crowds for the big games or the big seasons, but just for mundane stuff like this now. When it's too early to really know if this is even a good team and it's against an opponent that does not matter and the weather sucks and they're still selling out the stadium. That's cool. That's very
Yeah.
cool.
And they got some incredible content out of it once again. I mean,
Oh
I'm
my
sure
God,
more is going to
yes.
hit, but some insane photos of the lights up, lights down with the fireworks and the smoke machines. And, there's been some videos of that already that's hitting, Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. And it's awesome because it
That
really is like from a game against like the last 2 weeks, they played New Hampshire and Sam Houston. And they've had good enough crowds to where they have like it's some insane pictures and just content of the crowd and the atmosphere just from those two games. And then, oh yeah, next time they're at home, they're playing Colorado. Like that's crazy.
Yeah, it really is. And before any older fans get offended, I'm not saying that UCF didn't have crowds like this for previous seasons. It's just that I think the biggest difference is like UCF's the bounce house has always been a really good atmosphere. We've talked about that at length. It's the difference is that it was always less so for the mundane games. The example I'll give you is that the 2013 season, they went to the Fiesta Bowl. That was coming off a good season. They were good in 2012, won 10 games, and they opened with Akron, and it was 35,000 people. Just totally fine. Nothing wrong with that. I didn't scoff at that at the time, which I was 16. I wasn't super into like crowd stuff then anyway, but like there's nothing unusual about that. The difference is now it's like the versions of those games now are sellouts with great atmospheres. It's just little things like that are how you sort of elevate as a fan base. And yeah, the only other thing I want to say about the atmosphere is that UCF is still not a full share Big 12 member. Let's remember that. So they're still not getting as much money as the other Big 12 teams. They are getting more this year. They're like up. I think they're at like, I don't remember where they're at. They might be like 18 million, something like that. Um, it's becoming clear through these first two home games that most of that money, if not all of it, has gone directly to the firework budget, and I'm not sure why. They are like it's just like a random TV timeout, and they're like, let's do mortars like it's 4th of July. It's like they used to just have like those kind of streaming fireworks, like the sparks that go up. They were launching mortars over the stadium like repeatedly throughout the game. I don't know if they got some deal on fireworks or some like I don't know if they like one of the Kingdom boosters is like I got a fireworks side gig that I want to help out UCF with, but it would just be like Sam Houston injury timeout, and they're like, yeah, and it's like fireworks and stuff. I hope that continues
I
all
do love it.
season. Yeah,
I do love it. Last thing, we always usually kind of end our post game podcasts with this kind of stuff, but just special spotlight to the helmets again.
Yep.
We talked about it, I believe, on this week's podcast that they were doing the partnership with Arnold Palmer Hospital. It was just cool. I know I think from what I saw on the broadcast, like they had like a special presenter for the coin toss. I'm sure at some certain points in the game there that weren't televised, they had, moments to honor and recognize, patients and, their partnership with them, and just those helmets. I mean, they looked really cool, and it was a
Yeah.
great cause. It was just a great thing to see. So I love
Yeah,
that.
100%. I mean, it's sort of funny. It's because sometimes when you're as, like rabid as us with UCF football and all the crazy stuff, you forget that like one of the coolest things about a sports team of any kind, whether a professional team, but really in particularly a college team, is it's a community, right? I mean, that's what
Yeah.
it is. And to have that spotlight and use it for good, which in this way was just really, really cool. And honestly, just so beyond what I mean, this was just such a next level of putting a spotlight on something important versus just saying we're theming a game after something. I mean, for UCF to literally devote their uniform to this, to put this on the
Mhm.
helmets, to put on the jumbotron and say, let's talk about this and let's give these kids the opportunity and just to I mean, those decals were so freaking cool, and I'm sure that meant so much to those kids and those families. It was a really really freaking cool thing, and I love that UCF is the program that does stuff like that so much.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. I love it. I think that's it. I think we'll leave it here. We'll come back early next week with our TCU preview. We'll maybe clean up some things that we missed from the Sam Houston game. I don't know whether there's going to be that much. I don't know if there's going to be a lot that I'm going to have to come back to. This was just kind of a nice game to just get through, I guess, and
This was a
not have to
nice
worry
game to get.
about.
I am, while the
Um,
stress will be much worse this week, and I expect that I will be having palpitations many times. It is kind of nice to like have a real game now. Like I just that like this week is to really
100%.
actually be, because I've been getting a little bit of like FOMO this week, watching some of the other
The
big
same way.
games that the Big 12 teams are playing, and I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm kind of ready for one of these. So
I watched Arkansas, Oklahoma State, and saw like Oklahoma State's crowd and being like, it's like it was a big game obviously for them, and
yeah,
thinking like, oh man, I can't wait till like UCF
I
has a game that's
know.
like, has some stuff on the line, some consequences. So yeah,
Yeah, I
that'll
have
be
to
next
be
week.
like you said, that we do this. If you're listening to this, you're diehards like we are. You know how much we care. And by like midway through the third quarter, I'm like, can we just like wrap this up? Like I'm like, let's get
Yeah,
there.
yeah, but yeah, we'll see. I gotta say the real thing next week.
Oh
UCF
God,
at TCU.
their first real
UCF's 2 and
game.
0. UCF's 2 and
Yeah,
0. So
haven't gone 2-0
um,
since last season.
yep. We'll be back next week with episode 225. Until then, you can find us on Twitter at Bailey J. Adams 22, at by CA Simmons, at Night Sports Now, and at Pegasus Podcast. Thank you guys so much for being with us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everybody.